Alright, so this is the mini grammar lesson number 1. I'm going to call it Sentence Basics, and on this one we're going to cover things like what makes a complete sentence, what makes something a run-on sentence or a comma splice, what a sentence fragment is, like if you're missing a subject or a predicate. We're going to talk about semicolons and colons, and so you do need to make sure you've done this one before you proceed to other ones, just so you make sure you got the basic ideas that will help you understand the other concepts in later videos. Alright, so first, and I know this is kind of a basic review, but just for the rest of this to make sense, we need to talk about what the elements of a complete sentence are. This also can get called an independent clause. Independent because it stands on its own, it can do its own thing, it can be its own complete sentence. So, in order to have a complete sentence, you have to have some kind of subject, which is usually a noun, and then some kind of predicate that includes some kind of a verb or an action. It can be pretty short and simple, like Lucy likes to dance, the boy is running away, she opened the door. And then so in the case of a sentence fragment, means you're missing one of those parts. If the subject or the predicate is missing, your clause is no longer independent, therefore able to be a complete sentence. And so that's when we say you've got a sentence fragment. That's what that means. You're missing one of those two pieces. So, sometimes those sentence fragments are pretty obvious, especially when they're short, like the little girl, not a complete sentence, or in the car, not a complete sentence. But when there's a lot more words, sometimes it can be harder to notice that you have a sentence fragment, like jumping and dancing around frantically. You have a predicate there, but you don't have a subject. Or vice versa, a teenage boy wearing a red and white striped polo shirt. That is all subject, but no predicate. There's no verb. Nothing happened there. And so, in another lesson, in another video, we'll talk about sentence fragments that do contain subjects and predicates, but that are also using extra words that make them dependent clauses. So don't worry about that yet, but that is definitely coming up later. On the other hand, run-on sentences are when you have more than one complete sentence, but you do not separate those sentences with the appropriate punctuation or connection. So, here's some maybe more obvious ones. It was a good movie, I really liked it. Or, don't leave your dog in the car, the weather is way too hot. Both of those are two sentences sort of smushed together. And that's where the dividing lines would be. When you have multiple sentences running together without the right punctuation separating them, those are run-on sentences. But they're also run-ons if you only separate them with conjunctions or with commas, and we'll have some examples of that. For instance, I'm going to Florida for spring break and I can't wait to swim in the ocean. That probably looks correct to you. This one probably does too, or if you've ever got in trouble for comma splices, you might see what the problem is. Joe needs a new pair of shoes. He doesn't have the money to buy them right now. So, there are three main ways you can fix the run-on sentences, and we'll talk about what the problem was with those in just a second. First, you can connect them with a comma and a conjunction, not one or the other. You can also just separate the two sentences with a period, or you can connect the two sentences with a semicolon. So, if you connect with a comma and a conjunction, those examples we just looked at. The top one, I'm going to Florida for spring break and I can't wait to swim in the ocean, that's missing the comma. It only has the conjunction. The second one, Joe needs a new pair of shoes, he doesn't have the money to buy them right now, that one only has the comma and not the conjunction. So both of those are incorrect, and you basically do the same thing to fix them. In the top one, we add the comma to go with the conjunction. In the bottom one, we add the conjunction that was missing to go along with the comma. So either of those would be correct. Now you can connect the two complete sentences. You might think of it this way. A conjunction is not strong enough to connect two sentences, neither is a comma, but when they work together, they are strong enough. These are really common issues that I mark when I'm grading a paper as grammatical, and they're not huge issues, and they don't sound off when you say them out loud. But you do want to make sure you know that you need both of those things, the comma and the conjunction. So one more quick note about this. If what comes after the conjunction is not a complete sentence, you can omit the comma. So if the subject is missing, then all of a sudden just the conjunction is totally fine. So in those examples we used a little while ago, I'm going to Florida for spring break and I can't wait to swim in the ocean. You can actually just take out the subject in the second sentence. I'm going to Florida for spring break and can't wait to swim in the ocean, and now it's correct. And same with the bottom one. Joe needs a new pair of shoes. He doesn't have the money to buy them right now. You can get rid of the subject and the comma and make it a conjunction. Joe needs a new pair of shoes but doesn't have the money to buy them right now. Now it's correct, punctuated correctly. Now, if you have a dependent clause, something that would be a fragment following an independent clause, you do not separate it off with a comma, which is exactly what those two things were an example of. Okay, another way to connect run-on sentences would be separate them with a period. It was a good movie. I really liked it. Just put a period between it. Same thing with the second example. Don't leave your dog in the car. The weather is way too hot. Period between the two sentences, and now capitalize the, and you are all set. You can also connect them with a semicolon. In the case of the top one, same place as the period, and in the bottom as well. And really the reason you might choose these, they're both correct. Really the reason you would use a semicolon instead of a period is you're showing a stronger relationship between those two sentences than maybe any other sentences in the paragraph. You don't want to overdo semicolons. If you're using them in every sentence or every other sentence, you're probably doing it too much. All of those ideas can't be overly connected. So pick the ones you really want to highlight, use semicolons for those. Everything else, just use periods. You can also use semicolons in sequences, but we're going to talk about that in a separate lesson. Now, if you are going to use a semicolon in this way, connecting sentences, what comes before it needs to be a complete sentence, and what comes after it should also be a complete sentence. If either one is not, semicolon is not what you need there. Colons, there are some common uses for these. Introducing items in a list is a really common one. Introducing a quotation, this is when you want to file away for English 102 because you will use that a lot. Also, you can connect two complete sentences with them, kind of like you do with semicolon. Is just a little bit rarer to see people do that. So if you're introducing items in a list, it would look like this. I'm missing several ingredients. I need to bake this cake, vanilla, eggs, and buttermilk. You can introduce a quotation. You have the introductory sentence. It's a complete sentence. The recipe I found makes a bold promise, and then you got your colon, and then the quotation follows it. And then finally, you can connect those two complete sentences. Missing the buttermilk is no problem, you just need regular milk and either vinegar or lemon juice. Now what you want to do is proceed to the review quiz just to make sure that you understood all of the concepts in this lesson.